Welcome to video 27 of Gamer to Game Developer Series 1, and in this video we'll implement terrain. So we'll go ahead, we'll download the terrain assets, and we'll download the toolkit that will allow us to automatically generate terrain. Then we'll then go ahead and create the terrain, place trees, add wind, and place grass. So this tutorial video doesn't have any scripting at all in it. It'll be a nice easy video. So let's go ahead on to our first step, which is to get what we need. On the Unity website, go to Support, go to Resources, then click on Assets, and we have here Terrain Assets, so let's get that, and then just go ahead and download the package. We'll also need, under Extensions, so Unity Extensions, we'll need the Terrain Toolkit, and download that as well. And this toolkit also comes with a really good tutorial video as well that explains how to use it, so I'd really recommend watching that as well. Once you've downloaded them, just go to Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and import both of the two packages that we downloaded, and of course import everything when it asks you to do so. Once you've imported the terrain toolkit, you'll see two warning messages appear, and it's about something being obsolete, so we can just open it up. It's from the terrain toolkit editor script, and in this bit of code right here, if n textures is 0, this editor GUI layout, it needs another parameter now after whatever version this was originally written in, and that parameter is that we just need to add a boolean now and say false in this case. And we do that the same thing for this other line here. After the else, we'll just put in false. Okay, and let's just save that, jump back to Unity and just check, and the warning messages disappear. So now that we've done that, we can move on to the next step. Our second step will be to create the terrain. Well, it's time to say goodbye to our yellow cube and the plane, so let's delete the yellow cube, and for the plane, let's just move it down to -100. And I'll change the height of our camera to 30. And I'll now create our terrain. So go to Terrain and Create Terrain. Then zoom in, we'll zoom out so that we can see it. And then go to Terrain, Set Resolution, so we can change its parameters. And I want to change the width and length to 800. And I'll change the height to 60. And the height there controls how high the hills will be. And I'll hit set resolution there. Okay. So I'll move this plane because it's not going to be sitting at the center of the level, and we want it to sit in the center level. It just makes things easier. So what I will do is I'll set the X position to -400, and I will set the Z position to -400. So that makes our plane sit in the center of the map. Okay, now the plane is the terrain is really well lit up, so I will set the ambient light down so that it's easier to see when we start generating hills. So I will change the ambient light, and I'll change the red, green, and blue to 70. So change them to 70. 70. Okay, so that's an easier color to handle. And I will now actually add our new component. So we had downloaded the terrain toolkit. So select the terrain and go to Component, Terrain Toolkit. And we've now added the terrain toolkit. And I'd recommend that you watch that introductory video that shows how to use it. It's very good. That's how I learned how to use it. And I'm only going to make a really, really simple sort of terrain, just rolling hills, and basically that's all. So there'll be no landmarks or anything like that. So let's generate our terrain now. Select Berlin, and I'll use a preset rolling hills, and I'll just change the numbers slightly. So I'll change the frequency to 6. I'll change octaves to 4. Now your terrain is not going to look like mine. It is randomly generated. So there will be some difference between our terrains. So I'll hit the Generate Perlin Terrain button, and that's our terrain set up. Now I have this plane here, the one that I kept from before, for a reason. And I'm going to use it to determine what the water height is, what the water level is in our terrain that we've just generated. So in the next video, the water height is going to be 14 meters throughout the level. So I'm just going to change the plane's material so that we can easily see it. So I will change it to gold. Well, the yellow here. And I will then move its Y position to 14. Okay. And for our terrain, I will also do something else. Go to the settings button right here for terrain and set the pixel error to 1. So this will give us, so if you set it higher, it makes terrain look simpler on the editor view, but we need to see it pretty accurately. So I've set the pixel error down to 1 so that it'll look like what it's going to be when the player is actually running around on it. Now what I'm looking to do is to just generate a terrain such that I have like a lake and I have some 2 areas that will work as good starting points for our players. And I do think that this currently generated map might do. So it is a bit of trial and error here as well. You'll have to generate and regenerate the terrain until you get something that looks alright. It might do, it might not. Maybe this water mass here is a bit too big for my liking. Maybe I want something more like what's over here. But then we've reached the end of the level. So maybe what I want is more water in the center. So I will go back to our terrain and I will regenerate that terrain. And so I'm just trying until I get something that might look alright. And that looks like a pretty good result right there. So it does have a lake at the center of the map approximately, and I can imagine placing maybe like a player starting point over there and maybe another one right here or even right there. Okay, so as I was just saying, it is a bit of trial and error there. Okay, so once we have a terrain that looks sort of okay, remember we can always change it afterwards. Now we can move on to the next bit where we'll apply textures to it. So let's go to the Textures tab, and I'll just move this out slightly to give it a bit more room. And we need to start putting in textures. So let's add texture, add another texture, so a cliff texture, a texture 1, and a texture 2. So we'll use 3 textures for our terrain. And for the cliff texture, I'll use grass and rock. So just click select and let's make this bigger and let's look for grass and rock. So we have all these new textures here. That's what we downloaded in our pack. So here we go. That's grass and rock. Okay. Now for our texture 1, I'll choose a sand beach 2. So a sand texture, and texture 1 is going to be at the lowest levels in our map. So basically what I'll aim for is it'll give a bit of edge to the land near the water, and everything under the water will have this texture. So let's select and go to beach 2. All right, and that's it. Sand beach 2. It's a slightly darker sand. I will select that. For our texture 2, I'll select grass lawn. So this is the one, grass lawn. And I will adjust the settings up here as well. I'll set the cliff start to 5, and I'll set the cliff end to 50. And I will change where the textures start and end as well. So under texture 1 end, I'll set that to 0.2. And I'll set texture 2 to start at 0.32. So there's a bit of a transition from the sandy texture to the grassy texture. So what we'll have is wherever the faces are a bit steep, we'll have sandy texture, a bit of cliff texture, and then the transition to the grass. And where it's very shallow, it'll just go from mostly just from sand to grass. It looks really nice. So let me apply it actually. So is that it? Yes, that should be. So let's apply procedural texture. And we are getting what I'm after, which is really good. So you can see the cliff texture is what gives a darkish edging, and the sand texture is where the shore basically will be. Okay, but we're not done there. Now the textures themselves, they'll be looking really low res, so we'll need to increase while they're tiling. So we can change that. Go to the paintbrush icon right here, paint the terrain texture, and you'll see that our 3 added textures are there. So let's edit the textures. So I'll go to edit texture, and currently the tile size is 15, so it's very big. I'll reduce that down to 4 by 4 and hit apply, and I'll do that for the other textures as well. Edit them all and make them 4 by 4. Now the terrain will look much better with the sharper textures, but you can see that there's a visible tiling effect. So let me actually, oops, let me undo that. I just made an edit there, so I shouldn't select the terrain, because if you have the terrain selected, then you have these various tools active, and you can see the brush there. So you can manually edit the terrain. Just the terrain toolkit makes it so much easier to generate the terrain in the first place. So let's zoom in to what our textures look like. So as you can see, it does look pretty good. There is tiling, especially with the grass texture. You can see tiling in the distance. You can see visibly that the grass texture is a tile, but when you have it like the tiles really large, 15 by 15, it just doesn't look very nice. Like as you're walking on the grass with your player, you can see that it's just way too low res. Okay, so just some other things that we need to do, some simple things. We do need to change the tag of this terrain. So the tag needs to be floor, and we need to change the layer to foundation layer. So I'll do that right now. Okay, so that's it. We've just set up the terrain, and we need to add trees in our next step. We're on to our third step now, which is to place trees. Find your terrain assets folder, open that, and inside you'll see a folder called trees ambient occlusion. And inside it are the trees, well, we're going to use 2 trees, alder and thin tree. Now neither of them have colliders attached, so we'll have to do that manually. So let's just drag the alder first of all into the hierarchy panel. I'll change its position to Y25, so it's sitting above, and I'll just zoom in onto it so that we can see it. Okay. And I will change, so it doesn't have a collider attached, and we need to add one. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and add a capsule collider. So I'll go to component, physics, and add a capsule collider. Yep, and add. And we'll need to change the properties of this collider. I'll set the radius to 0.7, so it becomes really narrow now. So there we go, we can see it there, that the collider has become a lot more narrow. Now we need to center it, so at the moment it's not in the center of the tree, or close enough anyway, it's not close enough. So I will change its center position. So let me set that to say x0. Y I'll leave to 11.5 about, and Z I'll set to 0 as well. Let me have a look at that. So it does look like it's centered in properly. Yes, it has actually. It's pretty close. Like, it covers most of the main trunk. So our player is not going to walk right through the tree. So that was the case before. Without the collider, the player will walk through the tree. Now, as you can see at the moment, the tree does look really like a mess. So one thing is the billboard is all wrong. So we do need to change that. So to make it look right, I will change the scaling of the branches. So down here we have older branches. Let's set all of the scaling to just 1. And yeah, that looks, well, so much more sensible now. So it was just a bit off, that's all. Okay, so now that we have that, we have our tree. It's got the correct proportions to it. It's got a collider now, so the player can't walk through it. Now we need to actually create a prefab to hold it for us. So I will, actually there's something else I can do too. I might just increase, so it is a quite, let me just click off it. So it's quite a darkish looking tree. Now it is possible to make it look lighter. And I can do that by just selecting it again and increasing the base light. So I can go over here to base light. I can change it for the trunk and for the bark, for the bark and for the branches. So I can just click on it again, and just increase it slightly. Just make it look a little bit brighter. And I can see that even from the main camera that there's a difference. So it doesn't look quite so black. But then again, I haven't increased the light of our level yet, which I'm going to do soon. And that will also have an effect on how bright the tree looks. But I will increase the base light just slightly, so the leaves are a little bit brighter. It's just a personal preference. Okay, and with that, I'll now go ahead and create that prefab like I said I would. So create prefab, and I'll call this one Alder Collider. So just type Alder, and then I'll put a dash collider. And I'll drag our tree into it. And it needs to be in this folder, so that's an important point. It needs to be in trees ambient occlusion. So make sure to make your new prefab in this folder. Okay, and now I'll just delete the tree from the hierarchy. The other tree that I want to add is the thin tree. So I'll drag this one into the hierarchy as well. I'll change the height to 25. Well, its Y position to 25. And it too doesn't have a collider, so we'll need to add that. So component, physics, capsule collider. And for that capsule collider, I will change its radius to 0.4. So over here, radius 0.4, so it's really narrow now. And I'll need to change the center position as well. So I'll center X and let me just give that a try. Let me just try X at 0. And I haven't gotten the radius right there. It's 0. So that's wrong. Okay, so let me go back in and zoom into it. Have a look. So I'll set Z to 0 as well. Okay, that's much better. Now what about the height? Is it too high? Maybe its height needs to get changed. Well, actually it looks quite... Well, I suppose I could try changing the height. I don't think I really need to. So let me try, say, 14. And I'll set the Y height to 7. And yeah, that should be about alright. So the player won't be walking through this, that's for sure. Okay, so that's our thin tree. I'll again create a new prefab. So create prefab, and I'll call it thin tree collider. So thin tree dash collider. And I'll drop our tree into it and delete the original from the hierarchy. Let's select the terrain, go to the trees button, so place trees, and let's add those two trees. So the first one that I want to add is our boulder collider right there. And I will change its bend factor so that it bends in the wind, and I'll give it a bend factor of 1 and just hit add. Okay, and I'll add the other tree as well. So this will be our thin tree. So let's look for that. Thin tree, there we go, thin tree collider. And I'll also give it a bend factor of 1 and add that. Okay, now this is the tool that we're going to use to actually paint the trees onto our terrain. Now, what I will do is to change our tree height and width. So currently it's 100 and that's too tall. So I will change that down to say 50. And 50 again for the width. Now don't adjust the variation for color too much, otherwise some trees can be black, which does look quite odd. And another thing that we do need to remember is that when we're painting the trees, avoid painting too close to any steep edges or the shoreline itself, because otherwise a tree can be hovering in the air. Like you'll see the base of the tree half in the ground and half not, so it looks like the tree is sort of floating, which looks odd. So if you have any trees which have very thick trunks, you wouldn't place them on edges. Okay, but so we can start painting the trees now. You adjust the brush size and tree density to your liking. So brush size is obviously this big blue thing that's appearing in the editor, and I will just make this smaller and that bigger. And the tree density is basically how many trees per, I guess, click that you do. So maybe that's a bit much, so I might reduce my tree density down, and then I'll just paint them all over the place, basically. So that's really about it. So I'll click the thin tree as well. Now this one will paint differently. It'll be, because it's a smaller tree, there'll be a lot more. So now go ahead and start painting your trees. So I'll do mine. I'll paint all my trees down, and meanwhile you do painting of yours, and then come back in a bit. Now while I've been painting, there's something I should mention, is that when you're painting, just hit your F key to zoom in on the next unpainted, well not unpainted, sorry, just zoom in on where you have your brush hovering. So that makes it a lot easier to paint the tree. So you can use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and then just hit F to zoom in onto the location of interest. And that makes it a lot easier to paint, so you don't have to rotate as much. If at any time you place trees in the wrong place, just hit your control button and left click, and you can just delete that, besides doing undo. So that's just an easy way to control where you remove trees. Okay, I've finished painting my terrain with trees, so that's all done now. Looks alright, and I can probably hide the plane now. This yellow plane, it is pretty ugly, as I only needed that to know where the water level was. And what I did while I was painting the trees, I did add 2 little bits of land, so I might just turn it on there. Just added 2 little bits of land here, just raised up bits, so tiny little islands inside this lake here. And my intention is to place like a recharge pickup group somewhere here, and I've just added that just for a bit of fun. Now to do that, I just simply had my terrain selected, and I use this raise terrain button here, raise the terrain up a bit, it became a mound, and then I use this smooth height button and just smooth it down, and once I've done that, I hit apply procedural texture again to reapply the textures so that it would look right. Okay, so that should be it for our painting of trees. Now I do want to set the light level back to what it is, so the level looks pretty dark and I guess dreary at the moment, so I would like to change that. So go to Edit, Render Settings, and let's change our ambient light. So I will change it to red 230. I will change green to 230, and I will change blue to 220. And now that looks so much better. Well, to me anyhow. I guess it's always a personal preference, but I think it just looks much nicer now. And much more restful on the eyes as well. So that's our trees done. So we do need to add in something else in our next step. So we'll move on to adding some wind, and after that we'll add some grass. Our fourth step is to add wind. Adding wind is really easy. Let's create a new empty game object. I'll name it. I'll reset its position. I'll name it wind. And I'll add a wind component. So component miscellaneous wind zone. And I will just change some of its parameters. So I'll change wind main to 0.4. I'll change the turbulence to 0.2. I'll change pulse magnitude to 0.8. And I'll change pulse frequency to 1. So it's going to be quite a nice sort of breeze that has a visible effect on the trees. So I can hit the play button. So I might just do that. I'll hit the play button. And while I can't see anything moving in the background because they're just all billboards, we need to be closer to the trees. So what I might do then instead is to bring the camera a bit closer. So let's zoom in on the camera. And let's change its position so it's looking that way. Maybe I'll have it go back. So I'll change its Z to -50, where's that? No, not quite yet. -100. Maybe make it -120. Okay, let me try this. Okay, so I'll hit play again. And there we go. In the bottom of my game view, I can see that the trees are just gently being pushed. Now, of course, the billboards are going to stay still. That's their purpose. At a certain distance, the trees are just changed to billboards. Okay, so I can stop playing that. We can see that the wind is working, and that means we can move on to the next thing, which is to add grass. We're on to our last step, which is to place grass. So select the terrain, click on place plants, stones, and other small foliage, and we will add a grass texture. So click here, edit details, add grass texture, and let's choose it. And I'm going to pick grass. This is the one right here. And I'll just add that in. And I will change some of these settings here as well. So I will change the min width, the minimum width to 0.4. I'll change the max width to 0.5. I will change the minimum height to 0.2, the maximum height to 0.6 because it's just way too tall at 2 meters. And I will also change the noise spread to 0.3. So this will give the grass a less uniform pattern. And the healthy color, I will change that. So I'll change the red to be 130. I'll change the green to 255. I'll change the blue to I'll change it to 150. And that should be it. Okay. And I'll change the dry color as well. I will change the dry color to just be full white. So I'll set all of these to 255. Okay, so that's the color setup. And I will now hit add. Okay. So I can paint it now. I can use, change the brush size to make the area bigger, of course. And now I need to zoom in pretty close to see grass that I add. So I can change the detail distance. So I can go to the settings, change detail distance. Well, it is at 80. That's pretty high actually. We're gonna set that down. And I need to be careful because I should avoid adding too much grass. So I can do that quite easily. So I should try and limit how much grass I put because grass will really slow down your game. So you do have to be careful with it. And I'll also avoid placing it too close to where water will be. So I might just get rid of that. Control and just left click. So I will just change that distance to something, just max it out for now. And that'll then make it easier to see from a distance. And I'll just zoom back in there. Okay. So this does take a bit of a while painting grass. It's not quite as quick as painting trees because you do have to be quite careful not to put too much. So sometimes it's important to put the strength a bit down and then paint it. Okay. So I'll leave you with doing that. Remember, you can hit F to zoom into other locations, and then you will have to use your scroll key to see the grass to get closer. And I'll leave you to do that. You can make some places with more grass and others with less, but I think less is probably a better idea, as I have gotten pretty excited in the past and put lots and lots of grass, which looks really nice, but your frame rate really falls down. Okay, I've finished adding grass to my level. I didn't add it everywhere. I added it all around where I'm expecting the players to be, which is around the central region of the map. And later on in a later video, you'll see that I'll add a level boundary so the player can't go beyond a certain distance. Alright, but let's put settings, and let's go to settings, and I need to give our grass, well, change the wind setting speeds for the grass itself. So for that, I will change the wind speed to 0.3. And I'll change the size to 0.4. I'll change the bending to 0.3. And for our grass tint, I'll leave it as it is with the alpha at 0, so it doesn't affect the color of the grass. Okay, I'll change some other settings as well. Now, detail distance, I really need to set that down. At 250, it's way too high. I'll set it down to 70. So that tells me that I'll see grass for up to 70 meters. Beyond that, none of the detail things appear. Okay, I'll accept that. And I'll change the tree distance as well. Currently it's 2,000 meters, so you can see trees for a long way. I'll change that to 360. And I'll leave the billboard start at 50. That's pretty reasonable looking. Okay, so I'll also just delete this plane that's in the hierarchy. We don't need the plane anymore, so I'll get rid of that. And back with our terrain. That should be all the settings that we need. I might just move our old recharge group. So let me try giving it a height of, say, 20, see where it goes. Let me see. Okay, so it's up in the air. Let me then just move it. So I will select this translate tool, the widget, and move it along. And I'll try and get it on this island right here. So I'll move that. Bring it down. Oh, that's maybe too low. Maybe not. And yeah, it is too low. So bring that up a bit more. And there's a bit of guesswork involved, I guess. Okay. And yeah, it's almost on the tree, so I'll just move it a bit more. And this way. Bring it back. Just make sure that it's not too low, nor is it too high. So this will be different for you, of course. For me, it happens to be at such and such position. For you, it'll be different, depending on how your terrain has, of course, turned out. Okay, let me just think about that. Is its positioning alright? Yeah, it looks alright. What about the height? It shouldn't be too high, otherwise the player can't walk into it. And I think it's alright. Maybe I'll just try setting the Y height to 14.9. Yeah, okay. And I might as well just put these all to numbers at -31. Okay, alright. Okay. So now let's go ahead and run the game. I might just build and run it and see how it looks. So I'll go File, Build and Run. Alright, so I've built my game, and what I've done is to launch 2 copies. So I'm not going to use the editor as a server because of all this motion is almost just too much for the screen recording, especially for my computer. So let me connect. I'll connect as a blue player and see how that looks. So yes, it's running smoothly, but I expect that in the screen recording it is going to look quite stuttery because, as I just mentioned, it is actually just a bit too much for my PC and the screen recording software as well. What it is that I'm using a lossless codec, and that means I want the image quality to be outstanding. And I choose that over it being blurry, and because of that, it looks, I guess I get less frames recorded. Okay, so I just wanted to see what it looks like. I did move my player spawn points while I was editing the grass, etc., while placing the grass. So I just did place the player spawn points in different locations so that the player wouldn't fall through the floor. I can see the pickup group over there. I can place blocks anywhere on the ground, basically. It's still in its virtual grid, of course, and it recognizes that this terrain is the foundation layer, just like we set it as that. Okay, so that's nice, and the pickup groups are at good heights. Now I did connect as a blue player. Let me just connect as a red player and just check that I did put the spawn point. Yeah, it's at a reasonable position. And all this area, the light colored sand, it's all going to be underwater, which we're going to implement in the next video. And I should probably tell you beforehand that actually water is going to be one of the more complicated videos. So I'm just telling you that beforehand to just let you know that water isn't some really simple thing that we just put in, because we need to add water behavior to our player as well, and that just requires a bit of work. Alright, so that's it. In this video, we've taken away our old gray plane and the yellow cube, and we added in our terrain. We put in trees, we put in a little bit of wind, and we put in grass. And it all looks pretty nice as well. Like I can see all the grass swaying, etc. The trees sway, and of course trees at a distance don't sway because they just turn into their billboard mode, which is good. It saves the game from slowing down. And grass is probably the biggest thing slowing down this prototype project because of all this motion and all the detail. Okay, so that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video.